Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alison Lagrange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global South. Join me every weekday live on Firstpost. Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alison Lagrange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global South. Join me every weekday live on Firstpost. Hello and welcome to Firstpost Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alison Lagrange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. The Kremlin says Vladimir Putin is ready to talk to Zelensky if necessary, while still questioning his legitimacy as Ukraine's president. This as US and Russian delegations hold talks in Riyadh on the Ukraine war. Israel says it will begin negotiations on the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire deal this week, including an exchange of hostages with Palestinian prisoners. A Delta Airlines jet flips upside down upon landing in Toronto amid windy weather following a snowstorm, injuring 18 out of 80 people on board. Mark Zuckerberg's Meta says it will lay an undersea cable stretching across 5 continents to carry data, including for developing artificial intelligence. And Pakistan steps up security in 3 cities as it gets set to host the Champions Trophy tomorrow. It's the first major cricket tournament that Pakistan is hosting in nearly 3 decades. Hello and welcome. We begin with the latest updates from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the Rwanda-backed M23 rebels have begun tightening their grip over Bukavu, the second largest city in the Central African country's mineral-rich east. This a day after its capture, the Tutsi-led M23 rebel group was seen strengthening their control over Bukavu, which has a population of over 1 million and is the capital of South Kivu province. The rebels were seen promising the residents that they would restore peace and security around the city that saw severe looting in the wake of the clashes. In a statement read on local radio on Monday, a rebel alliance said that also includes the M23, that it would assist the population of Bukavu, who were abandoned by the Congolese army and allied combatants. Moreover, sharing a communique on social media platform X, the Rebel Alliance further urged all the vital forces of the Central African nation to unite in the struggle against the state gangsterism and terrorism. Furthermore, the rebel-appointed governor of the North Kivu province has also reportedly announced that Goma and Bukavu's ports will reopen on Tuesday. Navigation had been banned on Lake Kivu amid the escalating violence in the region. Besides, a day after its capture, Bukavu's border crossing with Rwanda also reportedly remained closed. Most shops and stores across the eastern DRC city were also shut. In spite of that, several Congolese people who fled from Bukavu following the clashes over the weekend were seen returning to their homes through the border crossings between Rwanda and the DRC.
We fled to Kamanyola last Friday after the fighting intensified. We have been there for 3 days, now even as the fighting went on. There was no way to go back from Kamanyola to Uvira, and the road was not accessible. So, today CPGL facilitated our repatriation through Rwanda. We are very grateful the way we were received and glad to be here and looking forward to getting back home.
There is no activity there, and everything is closed. But we have taken the courage to come to the border to go home. This is our home, and we have the right to go home.
Meanwhile, the DRC government in Kinshasa has criticized the inaction of the UN Security Council in the wake of the M23 rebel group seizing the city of Bukavu in the mineral-rich east. In a letter, the DRC's ambassador to the UN wrote that Kinshasa was outraged to see that the Security Council had been unable to reach a decision despite the gravity of the situation. The ambassador further said that the Security Council's paralysis had given free rein to the continuing illegal occupation of Congolese territories by Rwandan defense forces and their supporters from the M23 terrorist movement. He added that the Security Council must conduct an emergency meeting and urged the organization to act decisively and immediately. Last week, the DRC's President Felix Tshisekedi also slammed the international community for what he said was its lack of response to the escalating violence in the country.
If today my country has been attacked in an ostentatious fashion, and this hasn't practically moved the wider world, this totally calls into question international law. How can the integrity of a country be violated like this? Its people massacred without the country responsible being sanctioned. This raises the question of the United Nations, which for me has become a two-tier organization depending on whether you are among the powerful or privileged countries or whether you're among the weak and disadvantaged.
Now, the soaring crisis in the DRC's mineral-rich east has already killed thousands of people and has internally displaced millions, with many battling hunger and diseases such as the M23 has captured North Kivu province's capital Goma and neighboring South Kivu provinces Bukavu, Nyabibwe and Kuvuma, which has given it full control around Lake Kivu, one of the largest lakes in Africa. Despite the repeated calls for a solution to the conflict, there is no sight of the crisis coming to an end, or the warring parties coming to the negotiating table to discuss a peaceful resolution. Will the international community step up its efforts to end the escalating crisis? To discuss more on this, we have with us Beverly Ochieng, a senior analyst at Control Risks, who is joining us live from Dakar in Senegal. Welcome to Firstpost.
Thank you so much for having me.
What are the key factors that have enabled the M23 rebels to advance so rapidly in eastern DRC, and how significant is their control over Bukavu for the broader conflict?
Well, M23 has shown that it has stronger military credentials compared with the DR Congolese army. This region is their stronghold, so they have been able to capitalize on their knowledge of the terrain, their apparent surrender by the DR Congolese army, and even having more sophisticated weapons and military formations to be able to advance into Bukavu within a very short time of seizing Goma, the neighboring regional capital. They're also benefiting allegedly from support from Rwandan forces, who are said to be between 4,000 and 5,000 in the region. And this is also happening in a context where there's been the partial withdrawal of UN peacekeepers, the loss of paramilitaries who are allegedly from Romania supporting the DR Congo government, but also some of the troops that were contributing to the regional Southern African Development Force have withdrawn from the conflict. The seizure of Bukavu, the airport, and even them controlling the ports means that there's limits to how much the DR Congolese army can intervene. But it also weakens President Tshisekedi, who had staked his claim to power in 2019 when he was elected, to settling the insurgency in the east. Despite imposing military rule, despite military operations, M23 has continued to gain territorially and also to discredit his government politically with this seizure.
And Beverly, with the M23 tightening its grip on major cities, how is the Congolese government and military responding? And what role is the international community playing in either deterring or facilitating any negotiations?
I mean, the government has said that it's not going to talk to M23 and it will continue with military action. And this has led to a bit of an awkwardness around how the regional and international community are likely to either intervene or how they're accused of fueling the conflict. So we saw that there was a summit by the East African community and the Southern African Development Community over the past week. They had called for Rwandan troops to leave and for M23 to cease fire, but this has not been adhered to. And in fact, the two regional blocs have more or less been left bickering over who is responsible for the conflict escalating to this extent. DR Congo has tried to appeal to the international community for sanctions against Rwanda, but they haven't been able to achieve that so far.
And given the long-standing tensions between Rwanda and the DRC, how might these latest territorial gains by the M23 impact regional stability? And is there a risk of further escalation involving neighboring countries?
Well, yes, definitely, because not just M23, but various other rebel groups have links to regional countries. So the FDLR, which Rwanda has claimed has been fighting the DR Congolese army, Burundian forces have been present in South Kivu. Uganda said that they will be sending additional reinforcements to be able to support the fighting in the region. So it means that there's going to be bound to be a regional conflagration because of more countries being pulled in to either intervene or to fight against rival rebel groups and dissident groups based in Eastern DRC.
Beverly, thank you very much for being with us on Firstpost Africa and for your valued analysis and insights. For our next story, we shift focus to Sudan. After almost 2 years of a devastating civil war, Sudan is possibly heading toward a Libya-style split. Warring factions in the North African country, that is the Sudanese army headed by Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and the paramilitary chief Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, have announced parallel governments. A coalition of Sudanese political bodies will sign the founding charter of a new peace and unity government allied with the paramilitary RSF in Nairobi. This alliance includes a faction of the opposition National Umma Party, several armed groups, and former members of the nation's civilian government. Now, Sudan's army chief, al-Burhan, has rejected the possible formation of a rival government, criticizing the United Nations and a recent meeting by the African Union, which was hosted by former Sudanese Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok. The Sudanese army chief said any attempt to impose a solution from outside the country will not be accepted.
Outside solutions won't be forced on Sudanese people. I'm sending a message to the African Union and the United Nations. The Sudanese people won't accept imposing any government, and they won't accept having Hamdok or any other person. Those who want to rule Sudan should come and fight with the Sudanese people. The preference goes to those fighting now, those who can rule Sudan and protect it. They have the priority. Those traitors of the outside forces and speak in the name of the Sudanese people, they cannot come, and they won't come. They don't dare dreaming of ruling this Sudanese state.
The paramilitary's announcement of a parallel government comes after the Sudan army chief said that he is preparing to unveil a new democratic political bloc to govern the country. But reports say this is expected to happen only after the capture of Khartoum is completed. The Sudanese army had long been on the back foot in its fight with the paramilitary, but in recent weeks it has gained ground in Khartoum and has closed in on this symbolic presidential palace along the Nile. In the latest, the Sudanese army continued with its advance in Khartoum's Bahiri city, seizing control of several neighborhoods. With this, the army is moving closer to fully controlling Bahri and the East Nile area. Now, the army reportedly dismantled the RSF checkpoints leading to downtown Khartoum. Sudan's conflict erupted in April of 2023, when the two sides failed to agree on a power-sharing deal. The deal would have led to democratic elections in the aftermath of a military coup that the two sides jointly carried out in 2021. Since then, the fighting has left a devastating impact on Sudan. At least 150,000 people have been killed, and over 12 million have been forced to flee their homes. Sudan is facing the world's worst hunger catastrophe ever. At a time when aid budgets around the world are under increasing strain, partly due to a pause in funding by US President Donald Trump, the United Nations has $6 billion this year from donors for Sudan.
We're here today to launch two plans. Together, they request $6 billion to support close to 21 million people in Sudan and up to 5 million others, primarily refugees, in neighboring countries. And as I said at the start, we recognize that this is a staggering amount of money, the largest UN-coordinated appeal in Sudan's history. It would be a staggering amount to try to raise in normal times, let alone in the midst of the financial squeeze that we're experiencing. But a tough funding crisis doesn't mean that crises in places like Sudan disappear. And I refuse to believe that behind these challenges, we collectively have lost our ability to reach out and support those in direst need.
The UN says the funds are necessary as the fighting has already displaced a fifth of Sudan's population and stoked severe hunger among half of its people, which is set to worsen further. Famine conditions have been reported in at least 5 locations in Sudan.
Because this is a humanitarian crisis that is truly unprecedented in its scale and gravity, and it demands a response unprecedented in scale and intent. It's a crisis that is increasingly crossing Sudan's borders, threatening to destabilize neighbors in ways that risk being felt for generations to come.
In 2011, after decades of civil war and the loss of more than 2 million lives, Sudan broke up, with South Sudan becoming the world's newest nation. Now, with the 2023 civil war still raging and neither side being able to control large swathes of territory, it is unclear whether either entity will be able to govern Sudan. So the threat of a partition in Sudan is back. Will Sudan break up again? Moving on to East Africa now, where US airstrikes launched a major operation against the Islamic State in Somalia. Now, Somali officials say US airstrikes killed at least 16 Islamic State terrorists in Godka Kunle and in Jankukin in the Bari region in Somalia's Puntland. Somali authorities in Puntland say among the 16 terrorists killed were also 2 senior Islamic State members who were bomb makers. The US strikes also destroyed an Islamic State bomb factory. Somali officials say the United Arab Emirates also played a crucial role in the operation by helping the US with surveillance and intelligence for these strikes. Somali officials added that during the airstrikes, Islamic State terrorists launched drone attacks targeting bases of the Puntland security forces in the area. This is the second such strike in a month by the United States, and also the second under US President Donald Trump's new term. In his first tenure, Trump bombed terrorists in Somalia nearly 150 times. There were strikes under Democrat Joe Biden as well. However, the number during Biden's term was far lower. It stood at 40. Trump had earlier ordered an airstrike on Islamic State in Somalia on the 3rd of February. He also released a video that showed US forced bombing caves that were housing Islamic State terrorists. And reports say it was a direct hit and 14 terrorists were reportedly killed. Somalia's President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud thanked the US for its strike. He called Trump's leadership bold and decisive. He also said that Somalia and the US had a shared fight against terrorism. Somalia has been fighting terror groups for years. The most infamous here has been Al-Shabaab, an affiliate of the Al-Qaeda. Al-Shabaab, which has a larger presence in Somalia than the Islamic State, has been waging war on the Somali government since 2012. In 2015, Al-Shabaab split and some fighters joined hands with the Islamic State, giving birth to the faction called the Islamic State Somalia Province. This faction, based in Puntland, an autonomous region in Somalia, has been the target of US strikes. In 2020, right before he left office, Trump ordered the withdrawal of the US troops from Somalia. Joe Biden had reversed this order when he took over. Now back in office in 2025, has Trump returned with a renewed strategy in Africa against terrorism? We will see in the days to come. And for our last story today, let us turn our attention to the growing concern in Africa over Russian mercenaries aiding governments in their fight against terrorism. Reports suggest that some African leaders have allegedly voiced their concerns over Moscow sending ex-convicts disguised as mercenary forces to the world's second-largest continent. This was after reports emerged that many of the Russian mercenary forces currently being deployed to Africa were former convicts initially recruited to fight the war in Ukraine. Speculations are growing that Russian President Vladimir Putin may be relocating these convicts to Africa to prevent them from coming back to the country, where residents are fearing their return. And reintegration might be a problem due to their criminal history. At the height of their operations in 2023, an estimated 50,000 convicts were reportedly recruited in the war against Ukraine by the Wagner mercenary group. After that, Russia's defense ministry took over and allegedly recruited the convicts. Experts believe Putin may now find it appealing to send these criminals recruited for Ukraine to Africa, where they would reinforce existing mercenary units of the former Wagner group, already accused of recruiting criminals. Now, Russian mercenaries, as part of the Wagner Group and now the Africa Corps, have reportedly operated in African countries such as Mali, Libya, the Central African Republic, Mozambique, Madagascar, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Sudan. Additionally, they have also operated in countries such as Syria, Belarus, and Venezuela. In Ukraine, they have been accused of committing war crimes and human rights violations, including extrajudicial killings and torture. Human rights organizations and the US State Department have also accused them of deliberately killing civilians. In such a scenario, reports about Putin thinking of relocating former convicts has fanned fears and speculation in Africa that this could lead to an increase in crime rates in the countries they operate in, contributing to instability. But for now, African countries have welcomed the Russian mercenaries who, on behalf of Moscow, are helping them fight terrorism and insurgency that has plagued them for years. In return, these African countries are providing raw materials and minerals to help Putin's war efforts in Ukraine. However, will Russia continue to strengthen its foothold in Africa through this controversial mercenary operation? Or will the African governments push back to avoid destabilization? We'll continue to monitor and bring you the updates. And that's all on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.